Welcome to SuccesSoul Conversations. My name's Vicky Paul. I'm an intuitive, an artist and an author, and I am passionate about self-transformation and human potential. And these conversations are designed to lift your spirits, shine a light on some of life's big questions, and introduce you to some inspiring people who can help you become who you were born to be. And I'm delighted to have Nikki MacKay on the show today. You're my first guest of 2021, so it's lovely to have you on. And before I get Nikki to introduce herself, we were connected through a mutual friend, Bernadette Petrie, of the Barefoot Sanctuary in North Berwick. If you have not already seen my interview with Bernadette, it's over on my website, vickypaul.com. And I was fascinated to hear about what Nikki did. Now, Nikki is a family constellation therapist, an author and a teacher, but rather than me explain what that is, I'm probably not going to do it justice. I'd love for you just to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and what this amazing therapy is called Family Constellation.
Thank you. I work with family and ancestral constellation therapy with individuals and groups, and it's essentially a tool that allows you to look at where you're potentially carrying the unacknowledged trauma, the unseen or silent stories of the generations of the family and ancestors that have gone before you. So looking at where you're holding the stuff or living the story of someone else's life.
Now, how did you get into this? Because this subject fascinates me, and I write about soul DNA in my book, How to Be Successful. So it makes sense to me, but for somebody who's maybe not on a spiritual path or has never heard of this, and it was new to me, I have to be honest, when Bernadette introduced me to it. How did it come about? How did you get involved in this? And I guess, is it a spiritual practice?
I think you could view it as a spiritual practice. I think there's a deep sacredness to the work because you're working with the trauma that's held, that comes from the souls of the unacknowledged dead, and that I think has a deep sacredness and a spiritual aspect to it. Mm-hmm. The origins from it come from the origins of how it came to the West through Bert Hellinger are more from psychotherapeutic and Gestalt therapeutic practices. Okay. I bumped into it kind of by accident. I didn't know what it was before I ended up in a workshop down in London with a very close friend, and for a group constellation session where you look at something that you're experiencing in your present moment, so something that you feel blocked by or that you want to shift, and then you step into a field of individuals who represent different family members or aspects of whatever the block or the situation is, and they take on the characteristics of the family members or the situation, and you can discern the missing parts of who you are or where you come from through the unfolding of the field, and it blew me away. It was amazing, and it changed so much. I was immediately hooked and wanted to know more, and ended up going off to Austria to train with Bert.
Wow. Okay. So what did you do before you chose to take this on as a career?
I was a physicist. I worked as a medical physicist for the NHS in Scotland. So a wee bit of a shift.
I was going to say, from a scientist to probably something quite different.
Well, at that point, I was working in clinical physics, and I was doing my master's. And as part of that, you get to choose the project that you want to specialise in. And I had also just recently started working a lot with Reiki. So my master's thesis was on exploring the efficacy of energetic healing on the autonomic nervous system. So I've always been really curious and wanting to bring those two worlds together, the scientific world and the alternative complementary world. And it's something that I'm still doing. I'm involved in a research project with exploring the use of constellation as a tool for conflict resolution in a global conflict situations, looking at removing the toxicity from inherited trauma and deeply entrenched political and geopolitical situations right now.
Which is fascinating, and I'm going to shelve that for the moment because I'd love to come back to that. To go back to your thesis, have you always had an interest in the alternative side of life? Should we call it our energy work or spirituality? Is that something that's been with you, throughout your life, or is it something that you came to?
Yeah, it's something that I've always been interested in. I don't really thought about it as alternative. So it's just always been a part of who I am and how I am and what I do. It's very intuitive, and I like to work with that side of things. But I think there's room for all of that within one person. I don't think you have to choose. I think it's important to try and bridge the gap between one and the other, if possible.
Which is lovely, and I agree with you. But I guess I'm just preempting my second question around your colleagues at the time, because obviously it's very scientific based, and science is very much more recognizing, and I don't call it alternative, but just the other side of who we are as human beings, and the energetic sort of principles, energetic aspect of who we are, and science is certainly coming round to that. But did you, how was that sort of relationship dealt with colleagues? Were they open to it? Did they think it was a whole load of mumbo jumbo? Did you come back with scientific evidentiary proof that it does work?
Yes, we did come back with proof. We published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal, which was lovely. There was an interesting response from a lot of my colleagues, and I was quite young. I was just going through my initial training, but my supervisor was just lovely and fueled by curiosity as well. So and most people were curious. There was a lot of skepticism and jokes and naysayers, but I think you always tend to get that in that sort of environment. So yeah,
wonderful. And I think it adds an extra bit of gravitas to what you do, because you've come from a scientific background, and that area of life always looks for proof, whereas a lot of sort of energy work and is faith-based. And if you're in that frame, and I don't call it frame of mind, but if you feel that way, then you don't require proof, you just know, which is wonderful. So can you tell us what Family Constellation is, from a sort of back to basics? We've never heard of it, and how it would affect anyone watching, and does it affect everyone watching?
Yes, it does affect everybody watching. So who you are as an individual is massively influenced by your family and your ancestors and the lives that they lived. You are here as an individual because they were here. And when you talk about ancestors, it can feel like it's something that's really far away and away off in the distance somewhere, but the gateway to your ancestral field is the connection that you have to your parents. Mm-hmm. So your mother and your father, even if you don't know who your mother and father are, even if you don't have a great relationship with them, your biological mother and your father are the gatekeepers, if you like, to the maternal and the paternal ancestral field that flows down through to you as an individual. Mm-hmm. And if something has happened in previous generations of the family, whether it's close generations or a way back, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, if something has happened that is unacknowledged, or not seen or not spoken of or excluded for whatever reason, it has an impact on the generations that follow. Mm-hmm. And we can knowingly or unknowingly carry the wounds and the broken promises and the cost of what happened to our family and ancestors. We can be holding their stories as if they were our own. Can
I ask, just to momentarily interrupt you, and apologies for that, but it's come into my head. You mentioned earlier on about trauma healing, and I've actually got a number of friends that work in that field over in Switzerland, and I'm, fascinated by it. And a lot of the sort of trauma healing, particularly in the area that you're working in from a geopolitical perspective, is known trauma to the individual. It's experienced trauma in their own lifetimes that they have witnessed through their parents, their grandparents. Does family and ancestral trauma that is unknown to you, as whether it's stories that you're not aware of, does it have the same effect from the sort of ancestral point of view, the sort of soul point of view, than it does if it's known trauma and experienced trauma through parents and grandparents?
Yes, I think it's very difficult to separate known and unknown trauma, because the known trauma will be influenced by the unknown legacy of trauma from the previous generations. So you, for example, trauma relating to a relationship experiences informed by your parents' relationship. There's in every single relationship that exists between two people, there's a relationship promise, and that promise gets inherited from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, or along the line from one partner to the next. So even looking at that small piece of the inheritance of a relationship promise, the love life that you're experiencing at the moment could really be influenced by your great granny's broken engagement with somebody that you haven't heard of. You could be trying to, in some level, unconsciously fulfill that for her or them. So something as simple, seemingly as simple as that, can have a massive effect on you in the present moment. So looking for repetitions of patterns in families, because they do exist, whether it's relationship patterns or addictions patterns, also the full spectrum of the individual experience, all the way through to patterns that exist within the community and the culture, the place that you live, that also is very important.
So just again, for those who have just tuned in, we're talking about family constellation and the importance of the history and story of ancestors and how that impacts our life today, whether it is known stories or not, which can be quite something to grasp. So how would somebody come to you? What would be going on in their life that they would feel, okay, something's not quite right? How would that present itself? I mean, obviously they'd need to then investigate, because maybe they wouldn't have heard of family and ancestral constellation, but how would a potential blockage or challenge manifest itself in somebody's life just now that could be shifted and released and removed through the work that you do?
Through lots of different ways, but that feeling that you're stuck, or that you just keep reliving the same relationship only with different people, or that no matter what you do, you're just not seen, or you're just not heard, or you don't feel like you belong, that constant search and internal wondering that, or internal belief running that you're just not enough, or you're not worthy of love, or that it's not possible to be in a relationship and be happy in your work, or it's not possible to be happy in your relationship and be a parent, or that there has to be some sort of sacrifice of an aspect of yourself in order to belong, or to be seen, or to be heard. All of these things that run through us are inherited beliefs, or inherited promises or trauma that come from people in our field of influence. And they're experienced in a number of different ways, but that sense of being blocked or stuck, or just not feeling like you're in your right place, that not knowing of who you are. And if you find it difficult, a lot of people do find it difficult to just sit with themselves, to be in the quiet and to sit with your own energy and the connection with the land underneath you. If that's hard, or if you find yourself lifting up and out and drifting off to other places, if it's impossible to be still with yourself, then there's a reason for that, and to begin to explore what's coming in, what are you needing to move away from, or what are you carrying, or what do you have to finish off for someone else before you're free. All of these pieces point to entanglements with other people at other points in time.
I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And I guess, it's interesting when you talk about even the something is, and I say simple, and I don't mean it to be, but it's the word that's coming to my mind, the simple belief that, you can't be a parent and somebody who works and has a life. People, I mean, I wouldn't have called that a trauma. I'd have just called that, well, it's just a fact of life. That's kind of what we know. So, I mean, it's fascinating that these are hugely limiting beliefs that we will all have, by the sounds of things, that are stopping us from becoming the best version of ourselves. And it was interesting, we had a quick chat before we came on live, and I am fascinated by all of this and how much connection there is, in us for all of lifetimes, because from a sort of energetic, spiritual, soulful perspective, we are just energy which never dies. It's just incarnating into this body at this time, in this lifetime, for specific reasons. Now, these are my beliefs. They don't need to necessarily be yours or anybody watching. But it seems that family is such a massive thing, particularly at the moment when we've been going through the pandemic and we're either in our families' faces all the time because the kids are home and people have been furloughed and it's just full on, or we haven't been able to see our families. I haven't seen my mum. I saw her once last year. So family's hugely present in our circumstances at the moment. Do you think that that's got anything to do with the work that you do, that's an energetic alignment, or is it just purely circumstantial that we find ourselves in this lifetime experiencing, a situation where families and the dynamics of family and the dynamics of community has really come to the fore and it's in our faces? Do you think that's by accident?
I don't know if it's by accident or not, but I think at the moment we are living in a collective field of unfolding trauma. And when that happens, when there is unresolved trauma in our individual and collective fields, and when it's very difficult to sit in the silence with yourself, when it's difficult to be present with who you are and where you are right now, you lift up and out a little bit, and you drift into the points of entanglement that are in resonance with the unfolding field of trauma around us. And I think because it's so hard to be where we all are in this collective experience at the moment, it's really, really difficult to be that feeling of being trapped and being stuck, and freedom being taken, choices being taken, that we not only do we go into our own individual and family experiences of past trauma, we go into the collective field, and that can make us react as if we're carrying the weight of that on top of what we're experiencing. And so the collective memories of trauma that, in my opinion, are activated at the moment are stories relating to fear of lack and persecution and other points of trauma, like the Spanish flu or the Irish potato famine, or the need to run in order to be safe, but we can't run because we've got to stay at home. So all of these big collective stories are being triggered just now on top of all of our own personal stuff that's been triggered. It's really hard. It's really hard just now.
Yes. So I take it from that number one, we need to all give ourselves a bit of a break.
Yeah.
Because we have, aside what's going on in our own families and in our communities and globally, it's multiplied by 10 with the media and the government. There's this huge amount of fearful energy and trauma energy that's been thrown on us. So how do we step out of this? Because it's not a normal time. We've got additional trauma energy in and around us. And even during normal times, it can be difficult to step up and recognise that things need to shift, because any form of deep change and deep transformation, as you know, takes work. And we are all very fearful of emotions and feelings and what that brings up and how destabilising that can be for us. And at the moment, all we want to do is latch on, because fear makes us want to control, so we're in this sort of never-ending circle. How do you break out of that? What can you do to open yourself up to the possibility of starting to explore and release this trauma?
Well, I think one of the first things is to kind of shift it a little bit so that we're not looking to step out of it or to jump forward to looking for the better times, to actually be in it.
Okay.
And to stop. And the reason that the patterns and entanglements and the memories get inherited from one generation to the next is when they're not seen, mm-hmm. and when there isn't a space for grief. And I think it's really important to sit with the grief of the present, so the temptation to look forward to the new year and all of the points of hope. And that is important, but only if and only in addition to being able to look at and sit with all of the losses that we've experienced on an individual level, on a family level, on a community level, and on a collective level over the last period of time, to actually sit with the grief and to create a space for the grief. Even just saying to yourself, I'm grieving. I'm grieving for this and for this, for the normal that's been lost, for the people that have been lost, for all of the different things that have happened that have been so heavy and so painful, and to allow a space for that grief. Because when there's a space for grief, and when it's contained, when you're consciously sitting with it, then there's safety. It's a contained experience, mm-hmm. And there can be a space for tending the grief and then a space for tending the hope and the dreams. But if we try to scrabble out of it and try and get out of it without looking at the cost of it, then it will become a memory for the next generation and the next and the next. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly not what I want my legacy to be. So that place for grief is so important, and even it doesn't have to be for hours. Lighting a candle and just sitting in the silence and letting yourself gently lean into or touch into the grief, especially at this time in the winter when there is so much darkness and it can feel heavier. But the shifting the association of darkness into something different, because the darkness doesn't have to be death. The darkness is where we have our heartbeat. It's where babies are conceived. It's where we dream, and it's where we grieve. But creating a space for that will allow us to move forward and stay with actually who we are, rather than having to cut off the parts of ourselves that's too painful to touch into anymore. So I think that's the most important thing. How
do you grieve safely? How do you grieve fully if you are, we're not used to grieving as a society. We even find it difficult to talk about. Uh-huh. We find it difficult to communicate to other people. If they've lost someone, you just think, oh God, what am I going to say? We're all very awkward around the grief process, and we don't want to go there because we think we're going to end up rocking in the corner, an absolute unfunctioning mess. Mm-hmm. So how can we grieve consciously and grieve safely if we are not used to it?
Be as gentle with yourself as possible, and try and bring yourself into the present moment, to who you are today, rather than who you were last year or however many years ago. Or because when we experience trauma in the present, we lift up and out of our present moment, and we shift to previous points of trauma. And a lot of the time we'll go back to our childhoods and early trauma points, and we have no agency as a child. It's helpless, and it can feel overwhelming, and like you have no safety in the world. If you find yourself going into that place of lack of safety, lack of voice, gently reminding yourself that, and using your name is really really powerful. So for you, if you were trying to go into this and you find yourself shape-shifting and time traveling back to however many years ago, just gently saying to yourself, I'm not that Vicky anymore. I'm Vicky, but I'm here because that Vicky survived, and I'm here, and I'm choosing to be here, and I'm grieving. And just let yourself sink into it a little bit, and it can help to write it out, even just writing little headings at the top of a page. And I'm grieving, I miss, I've lost, I wish someone would ask me, and then let yourself scribble for 5 or 10 minutes and read what you've written. But you don't have to spend a lot of time in that place. And when you're coming back to, after you've spent some time with the grief, always coming back to I am, and then your name, and I have a place, and I'm here, and I'm enough. And just let yourself sink into who you are just now, because you're already enough. And one of the inherited beliefs that we have running through us very often is that we need to earn our place, that we need to earn our place by carrying stuff for other people, or by sacrifice, or whatever it may be. But if we can just have that reminder that we're already enough, and just sitting with who we are right now, and that's all. But that's still a lot. So being gentle is really important.
But an amazing, and I actually had goosebumps, which I get when something really resonates with me, when you talked about, entering into a grief process as you are today now. Because it's interesting, I talk about this with my clients when I do soul purpose work, is any blockage is energetic blockage. It's memories and traumas and histories and past that hasn't been dealt with and released at that time. But when you come to a problem, and this is just across the board, when you're hit with a challenge or a problem today, most of us don't come at it as to who we are today. We come at it as to all the problems and all the past histories and all the failures and all the baggage and all the negative chat. And then we hit this problem today, and we're way more capable and amazing human beings at this very moment in time, having learned so much and grown so much than we were in all these past versions of ourselves in this lifetime. I mean, all these different ages. But for some obscure reason, we tackle these challenges with all the kind of baggage. So I'm really passionate about the work that you do, and I'm delighted that you've come on here today to share this, because there's not one person walking the face of this earth that would not benefit from this kind of work, for no other reason to reconnect you with the truth of how amazing you actually are, and how far you have come in this lifetime, and how far we have come energetically, ancestrally. So can you describe, because I know that you can do this individually, you can do it for groups, but what does a session look like? Normally this would be done in person, but obviously we're in a situation where everybody's online now. So can you just give us a bit of an idea of how it would normally work? Because you mentioned about other people taking on the roles of family members, and instantly I'm thinking, oh my God, I hate role play. I just don't want to be in the environment. Because I've had past traumas of sales courses where you had to role play, and it's just like, I jest. But
it's not role play.
And who are these people? Are they strangers? And then also, if you can then explain how it works online.
Okay. Well, it's absolutely not role play. Don't worry. And most of my work is online and has been for the last few years. My clients are all over the place, so UK and Europe and America. So it works online very well. Individual sessions are just like this. We just have a chat and ask whoever I'm working with to bring in different aspects into their mind's eye, or to imagine the different people in the room and work through the constellation. When we create a constellation, it's like a map of all the different aspects of the situation or the issue that the individual is wanting to explore, and the looking for where you are connected to something or someone, or where you are drawn to give up your place to something or someone and that's impacting you in the present. And in a group, it's the same process. Instead of having the map built up in your mind's eye, you have other individuals within the group, and it's like workshops. Sometimes people know each other, sometimes they don't, and very often, which is lovely, it's from all over different countries coming together. And when you're representing in a constellation, it's really interesting experience, because not only are you representing the aspect of the collective story or an individual's family, you are also at the same time tapping into the aspects of your own field of influence that are in resonance with that aspect that you're representing. So, for example, if I think that the last collective story class I did was looking at the persecution of witches and women, and so we're having people represent things like the accusers or those that escaped, and when you're representing an aspect like that, you're tapping into all the different places in your field of influence that carry patterns that are similar to that. So when you're representing, all of that's moving within you, as well as you being of service to the individual or the story that the constellation relates to. So you tend to be quite tired at the end of it, but it's really powerful. I think representing somebody else's constellation or a collective story constellation is so powerful, and it shifts and changes so much. You get to tap into all the pieces that you didn't know that you were holding. So it's that some of the stories that you can be connected to will be surprising, but even just looking at the stories that you find moving, like when you're watching the news or you're reading a book, the lives that you feel moved by, or the aspects that you feel moved by, there'll be a reason for that. One of your family members or your ancestors, or the unseen women, the unseen men, the unseen souls, the missing children, that will be running through you in some way, shape or form. So when you step into a constellation field, it allows you to lean into that a little bit, and it allows the grief from those moments that weren't grieved then to have a place now, so that you don't have to unconsciously carry it forward anymore, and you're free to be who you are in your present moment without holding on to something that doesn't belong to you.
It's amazing that you talk about that, and I'm going to hopefully remember. I've got two or three things popped into my head, but it was interesting. I've always loved non-fiction stories set in Africa, and I've read so many different books, all with a sort of modern history element to it, because it just fascinates me. It's an easy way for me to sort of learn modern history, but wrapped up in a story, but always Africa, not interested in stuff elsewhere. And it was interesting, my grandfather did our family tree on my dad's side. I'm sure sort of 8 or 9 generations ago, we were over in Africa somewhere. And it's just come into my head as you said that, oh my God, that's maybe why I've got this fascination. So the reason that we are attracted to different things or connected to different places or different experiences or different feelings there's a reason for it, which is just amazing. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, I'm an artist, so I'm a very visual person. And when I close my eyes, it's not the noise that I hear. It's just like, woo, all this stuff going on. But if you don't consider yourself a visual person or an intuitive person, even though you and I both know everybody's intuitive, it's just who we are. But if you don't consider yourself that, how do you attach and work with this process? Because it's information. If you're asking people to sort of imagine characters and stories, I'm assuming information gets downloaded to you or surfaces, or however you frame it, of situations and family stories that you have no concept of. How does that come into your head, and does anybody struggle with that?
No, no is the short answer. I've worked with very intuitive, lovely people, and I've worked with businesses and people that are completely at the other end of the spectrum, and it doesn't matter. You don't need to be intuitive to work with constellation. And when you're in the map, when I'm facilitating the constellation, so the representation of the various parts, or the creation of the map in your mind's eye, or physically with mats on the floor, that's one part of it. The other part is that the language that we use within the constellation. And so I would be asking you, how you're feeling when you look at somebody else who's representing, or how it feels when you bring your mother into your mind's eye, or can you stay in your body, all these things. And then, and so you're sharing that, and that's spontaneous narrative. And very often that's spoken from the entanglement, your experience of the entanglement, even if you don't know that it's an entanglement. And then there's the directed narrative, and that's the phrases and the words, the language that I ask you to say to either for yourself or to address the different aspects within the constellation map. And the purpose of the directed narrative, that language, is to shift you. It triggers a brainwave response. It shifts you out of a space of entanglement into a disentangled state. And some of the sentences, the phrases are really simple. I didn't know you were there. I see you now. You have a place and I have a place. Or it can be so the language is used as a tool to affect the disentanglement of the memory. So it's the map is just one aspect of it.
And can we shift all of our trauma? I'll rephrase that, all of our family and ancestral trauma, because there will be new trauma coming in, I guess, from life, communities, etc., etc. But can we shift ancestral trauma? Can we be the last in the line of our soul DNA, and the buck stops here and that's it, and then the next generation are free from that? Or will there always be trauma passed down?
Well, firstly, I don't think it's anybody's responsibility to shift all of the family and ancestral trauma. And I think that can come in as a belief that you have to be the one that heals everything, or holds everything, or does everything before you're worthy of your place. So the sort of core concept of constellation is belonging. The principle that each and every soul belongs, regardless of who they are and what they've done. Every single soul belongs and has a place and an equal right of belonging. But when you are entangled, you can lift up and out of your place, and if depending on the relationship with your parents, for example, that gateway to the ancestors, if that very early relationship is entangled, then the place that you have, your belonging will be entangled and fragmented, and you may be viewing your belonging through a transactional lens, so the belief that you have to earn a place. And so you don't need to heal the entire family and ancestral field. You need to look at who you are and where you are, and what it costs you, or the belief of what it costs you to belong. because everybody belongs. But if there's something running in there that you have to hold X, Y, and Z in order to have a place, then we need to look at what X, Y, and Z are and shift that and give place to the grief, give place to the unseen. And often it is painful, it is hard work, it takes bravery and courage to look at these parts of your family and ancestral field, and you may be the first person to break open the stories or the secrets, the things that have had to be hidden, and things that we wouldn't think twice about today would be deeply shameful in previous generations. So just easing into that and sitting with doesn't have to be a secret anymore. I see you're worthy of love, I'm worthy of love, and allowing the movement and the separation of what's been held and giving place to the unseen souls. And the unseen, or who you are entangled with, won't necessarily be from your direct biological family and ancestral field. Like you were mentioning, Africa, you can be entangled with the victims of acts perpetrated by your family and ancestors. So your natural place of belonging may be outside of your family. If you have difficult relationships, if your belief system is so oppositional in comparison to the belief system that you're brought up with, or things that run through your family, you may be in alignment with the unseen rather than your direct family and ancestral lineage. And that's a hard place to move forward from, because you tend to be unseen by everyone round about you as well.
It's amazing and just fascinating concept, fascinating process, fascinating possibilities of what we can achieve, because ultimately, and it's interesting you talk about you just want to be seen and belong, irrespective of who you are and what you've done. And that's all anybody's ever really craving for. Anything that we do, any of the people that we attract into our lives, the jobs, the hobbies, everything that we do is an external reflection to come back to us to say, you are seen, you are worthy, you are loved. And I love this topic. I could just talk to you for hours about it. But I wanted to just ask you to share a wee bit more about the geopolitical trauma healing, because that's just amazing work. I've got a friend that works with child soldiers in Africa. And some of the stories is just, I edited one of the child soldiers' books and supported the editing in English. Although it was translated from Afrikaans into Swiss German, and then a Swiss German translated it into English. And this kind of so I kind of worked on it a wee bit, and I just could not believe what this boy in particular had to go through. It was just, we've seen some of the films and the stories on the news, and it almost seems like an impossible task to release that depth and breadth of personal and generational trauma. So I'm fascinated that you're working with this. So just, are you able to share a wee bit about it?
Yeah, I'm involved with two separate projects. One is with a colleague in the US called Chris Halliswood, and she's a political activist, and we're looking at the legacy of racism and systemic racism and slavery on the current situation in the US. And the other is a project looking at entangled political memory, and looking at the collective field of influence on conflict trauma. And it always points back to the entanglements, and because when we are entangled, we see each other through the lens of whatever the entanglement is, and that is so toxic in a geopolitical and a conflict situation. So there's a research paper published on the university project that was published last year, looking at the entangled political memory and a constellation mapping of memory as a tool to create a space for dialogue. Imagine being able to have a conversation when you're not talking through the inherited trauma, and yeah, I love it. It's very challenging because we've got a social scientist department meeting constellation, and you've got the language barrier to start off with, but the interdisciplinary conversations are so valuable, and it had me tearing my hair out and crying at the very start, but it's been so useful even just to try to have to break down what constellation is in a language, in a way that is accessible for individuals in a social science background was really interesting, and so the whole experience is fascinating. But yeah, there's
game changing by all accounts. I mean, properly life changing. You know, just huge. The possibilities of this type of work and how it can alter our beliefs, because obviously, I mean, we're deal with racism over here. Everybody, was, supporting Black Lives Matters, and that really came to the fore last year. But there's troubles, over in Northern Ireland. This history of, issues in Scotland, even, within football. The sectarianism within football. There's so many, and I don't want to call them applications, but so many parts of our lives where if you take a step back, you actually realize all these different attitudes and challenges and conflicts are, I mean, they're in every walk of life, and it's a mammoth task, but it's an amazing process. What a legacy.
With every collective focus constellation map that you look at, the same entangled piece shows up, and it's the fracturing, migration triangulation, the fracturing between those who left, whether through choice or otherwise, and those left behind, and the descendants of the present. And when you look at a country like the United States, that is a country made up of migration from Scotland and Ireland and huge parts of Europe with potato famine, the clearances, and just looking at that legacy and the fractures that come from that we're still living, and depending on the direction of the lens that you're looking in at, that's one aspect of constellation. I think it's so important to be aware of that fraction between those who left and those who left behind, and the descendants and the present, and what happens when there isn't a place for the grief. And what astounds me just now is that the statistic, I think, is 1 in every 97 people on the planet right now are forcibly displaced. And so that triangulation of those who left, those left behind, and the descendants and the present, that those 1 in every 97 people that are displaced right now, that will be a memory for the generations yet to come. So it's so important to look at the cost of not only our own legacy, the legacy of our ancestors rather, but what we're creating in the lives that we're living right now. And that's why I think that the place for grief on an individual and a collective level is so very important.
Oh, it's been absolutely fascinating talking with you, and what I might do is steal you again at some stage in the future to maybe do one of these on grief, because I think so many people, I imagine so many people struggle with grief. I know I did. We had 3 miscarriages, and I did not process that at the time, and thankfully I have moved through it and come to terms with it, and there has been a lot of good that has come out of it, and that's what I've realized, is that grief is not it's a moment, and that moment can be as long or as short from a time point of view as you make it and as it is for you, but there's so much good comes out of the grieving process, which is really bizarre to say that, because when I was in the middle of it, there was nothing good. nothing was good about it. So I would love to chat to you more about that. But it's just been absolutely wonderful and fascinating, and what a pleasure to hear more about what you do, and good luck with everything. My God, that's the possibilities are just incredible. They're incredible. And if people want to come and work with you, how do they come and get in touch with you? What's the best way? I will put all the details into the comments below, but you've also authored 4 books as well, which we haven't even talked about. So how can people come and connect with you, find out more about what you're doing, and work with you?
Just through my website, nickymacKay.co.uk, or through my Facebook page, which is Nikki MacKay Constellation Conversations.
Perfect. Nice and simple. We love that. It was an absolute pleasure, Nikki. Thank you so much for taking the time out to have a chat and just share and literally, I guess, scratch the surface of everything that you're doing. So it's been wonderful. And as Nikki says, if you want to get in touch, nickymacKay.com. And if you have anybody who you feel would benefit from watching this video, we would really appreciate if you would share it. If you want to watch more of my successful conversations with other amazing guests, just like Nikki, who are sharing inspirational words to help you reconnect with who you are and to become who you were born to be. The version you are just now is the version that you choose. You do not have to be stuck in the life that you're in. If you feel inspired to shift and change, then these are resources to help you do that. So I would very much appreciate if you could spread the love and share what we're doing. My website is vickypaul.com. If you've got any questions for either myself or Nikki, please pop them in the comments, or you can DM either of us. And just take care. Have an amazing day, week, month, whenever you watch this. And we'll be sharing more of these conversations in the coming weeks and months. Much love. Bye-bye.